Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name is, of course, Csaw or Chris, and today we're talking about World of Warcraft in 2020. Now, this is a video I've wanted to make for quite some time. Shadowlands came out a little while ago. It's almost been a month-ish, close to. I think we're still kind of like almost a week away, but it's been a while, and I wanted to make this video sooner, but then I was like, I actually haven't tried out all the content, so it didn't really make much sense. So we're going to take a look at it. We're going to take a look at the launch, the expansion, and see if it delivered, see if it satisfied. Because, well, let's be honest, unlike other WoW expansions from back in the day, there's more skepticism about an expansion than there really is good vibes. Specifically coming from BFA, I feel like most people felt like this expansion would fail. And it's kind of that flip-flop, whereas, you know, off of Legion, people were very excited for BFA, was a big disappointment. Off of BFA, people are kind of not excited for Shadowlands. I mean, they're still excited. People get excited when something's new, specifically in the MMO world. But I think it kind of brought the expectations down, and Shadowlands seems to have surpassed those expectations, or at least met them. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about some of my favorite parts, some of the things I've really enjoyed doing in-game, and some of the things I haven't enjoyed in-game. And let's kick off the list right with the first thing you're going to probably do is level. And there are two major things that have happened here. Number one, there was a leveling squish, and number two, the actual leveling process up to level 50 has changed dramatically in World of Warcraft, and I've done a separate video about this, but pretty much, long story short, you can choose to level through any of the main expansions from 10 to 50, and it really does make it feel a lot different and way more enjoyable. On top of all of that, I really hated the higher level cap in World of Warcraft, and specifically the higher damage numbers and all stuff that goes with that, so I was really excited to see a level squish as well. So that aside, how was 50 to 60? Well, another cool thing that they've done this expansion is the very first time you go through it, the leveling process is extremely story-driven, and this is kind of nice, but you do run into an issue where you've hit 60, or you can run into this issue, where you hit max level, but you do need to continue doing story quests to unlock future content. And as a WoW player, that was kind of irritating for some people. Now, as a Final Fantasy player, or someone who's been enjoying Final Fantasy XIV, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. And I kind of had different feelings about it. I think, and this is really where the big difference is with this expansion, it's good to go through the story once, and that's what they have you do. They have you go through the main story quest once, and you get your covenant and all that, and then when you're going in on an alt, you're presented with the choice to either do the story or do these things called Threads of Fate. And what that does is it unlocks your covenant right away. It's acknowledged that, hey, this person's gone through the story. They probably don't want to go all the way through it again, or they can if they choose, but it allows you to skip the story and just do side quests, sort of bonus missions around maps, dungeons, PvP, a whole bunch of different things. So it's a really nice way to kind of give the two different streams of leveling what they want. Now, the one big issue I had, and I haven't read much about this, I don't know if I'm just crazy, but PvP from 50 to 60 rewarded very little XP. It was definitely not worth doing, even for the first win of the day, which usually hands down is worth doing. It did not reward very much XP at all, and that was kind of sad, because one of my favorite things about World of Warcraft is the ability to level through PvP. So I was really sad to see that. I hope it does change. I haven't read anything about it, so maybe I'm just crazy. But yeah, that's something I noticed for sure. So you hit level 60, and what next? Well, the big thing if you're on your first character is choosing a covenant. Covenants are one of the big selling features of Shadowlands. And what I've noticed as time's gone on is the selling features of each expansion have become less and less enticing. Notably, they used to be new races and new classes, and apparently that's just not doable anymore, because that's usually what was really exciting. And don't get me wrong, I get that they're kind of scared of having class bloat, and there definitely can be that issue if you have too many classes, that they all start to sound the same, or seem the same, or are hard to balance. Like, that's definitely something to be concerned about, but these new features just aren't really on par with it. And allied races, although really cool, definitely don't feel the same as a whole new race. But yeah, that aside, let's talk about covenants. Covenants are cool. Covenants fit very thematically well with the Shadowlands because what you have essentially is 4 realms of the dead that can feel very distinct and very different. And I think that's already paid many dividends in the expansion because each leveling zone looks very different and feels very different, which is super refreshing, and it allows players to really identify with a certain zone of the expansion because you're going to choose a covenant that's from that zone. So I think that's really cool. The downside, and this is where we're getting to the negative part of the covenants, it's kind of cool, it's kind of bad, but covenants have a ability, and it's an ability that your spec will unlock when you join that covenant. So, you know, if you join the Venthyr Covenant on a warrior, a DPS warrior, you get a new execute that's called Condemn, and it's a very powerful skill that you can use. It's your kind of execute, so a big attack that you do when the creature's low health, but now you can also do it from 100 to 80% of the health as well. So you can do executes for like most of the health of the player, which is, or the monster, which is crazy. So it's been a lot of fun on my Arms Warrior playing with that, but because that was part of the Venthyr Covenant, I really didn't consider many of the other covenants because I really, really wanted that skill, despite the fact that thematically, in terms of aesthetic, map, lore, I would have much rather joined the Bastion people, the starts with a K. They're the angels. So it's kind of a difficult thing that way, where people are choosing between power and aesthetic. And whenever people are faced with that, it's a real hard decision because you want to look a certain way, but you kind of need to play a certain way. And they've tried to balance it as much as they can, but at the end of the day, there's certain skills that just vibe better with certain playstyles, certain builds, and you're going to have some that perform. Especially in certain situations like PvP, I think it's even harder because you have certain skills that have unique CC features like tethering and stuff like that. It gets really complicated to choose a different spec or a different covenant when you know one of them lends itself so well to a certain type of gameplay. So I think covenants were a very difficult choice, and I think that was by design. I hope it, you know, we'll have to see how it plays out. At the moment, I've been very happy with it. They do allow you to change your covenant pretty easily once, and from interviews it sounds like that every major content update, every major like big patch, when they kind of do some rebalancing of the covenants, they'll allow another change of sorts. But don't quote me on that. That's just what I've heard out there on the internet. So we'll have to see if that actually happens. But for the moment, I'm very happy with it. I think it's a really cool system that sort of ties in a lot of the feature-y stuff that people don't typically like in expansions. You know, you have your mission boards there, you have your conduits there, you have your dailies there. So it does really nicely condense everything into one bigger feature that you do have a bit of choice over. So I think that's really cool. You also get like this cool clubhouse to hang out in with all your fellow Covenant goers. So that's kind of cool too. It kind of gives you that level of bonding that Order Halls did, which is I think a nice add to the game. So we talked about covenants. The other main new thing coming to World of Warcraft is Torghast. Torghast is pretty cool. It's a roguelite sort of adventure where you have kind of the same dungeons that kind of feel different every time you go in them. There's different monsters, there's different paths and stuff. And there's a lot of these unique powers that let your character get super different, but it's controlled just in one zone. So I think it's a really good way of them to allow some craziness into the game without having it take over the expansion. So I think that's really cool. The main reason you do it is for Soul Ash, which is used to craft legendaries. There's kind of a weekly cap on it. You kind of go in and you clear 2 wings as difficult as you can. They kind of have like different levels within each wing or different layers. No, there's 2 wings. Each wing has different layers, and each layer has 6 levels. It's kind of confusing to explain to someone, but yeah, you just keep going up. That's the number one thing you have to remember about Torghast. Keep going up. Don't get distracted, because you can get lost in there for a while. But it's really fun. I think what's really cool is that you can do it as a solo player. It's definitely a great solo activity if you're just sort of on for 30 minutes and you're listening to an audiobook or something like that, or listening to some YouTube videos in the background. It's an excellent piece of content, but you can also do it with up to 5 players. So it does have that flexibility. If you do, have friends or something, and you want to run some Torghast, you can do it. Now, the one issue I have ran into is that it's way longer to do it with friends, at least the friends I do it with. And I definitely don't blame them. I think, if anything, it's me slowing us down. So I think the scaling's a little bit off. To the point where I kind of avoid doing it with friends if I can. So I would have them look into that, because I think, on paper, the idea was to have it so it's completely even to do it whichever choice you want. Friends with 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, it's obviously hard to scale that. But yeah, overall, the system's really cool. I like that it's a system that is required to get legendaries. I think one of the more difficult things is that essentially, if you're a PvP player, you're kind of forced into some PvE-ish stuff to get Solash to make your legendary. Now, there are certain missions on your mission table that reward Solash, so I guess eventually you could get stuff from there. But yeah, you're probably going to have to enter Torghast. It's one of the main selling features of the expansion, and hey, I think it's well worth entering it and seeing what it's all about. Alright, so we got through the new stuff. Let's talk about the stuff that's always there, the PvE, the PvP, the content. We'll start with PvE, because that's really what I dived into first. There were 8 dungeons on launch, 2 per zone. Right away, I love this a lot compared to BFA. Number 1, there aren't any dungeons that are locked behind rep, which, let's be honest, I did those dungeons just less than I did some of the other dungeons. Number 2, having 2 per zone is really cool. I think each dungeon feels very unique. Each dungeon has a specific sort of interaction for the Covenant of that zone, which is really cool and adds a little bit of personal flair to it. Now, it once again can get to the point where you kind of feel less powerful if your group doesn't have anyone with that Covenant. So there's a bit of that power choice there, but at the same time, I think it is a really cool, unique way for Covenants to interact with dungeons. Overall, really fun. I think, and a lot of people have kind of talked about this, Blizzard's had a different philosophy for loot this time around, where as opposed to having all of this gimmicky stuff like warforging and stuff that kind of makes it feel like a lottery every time you loot something, you now have these best in slot items that you can strive for. However, typically people have been getting less loot, which means it takes longer to get the gear, but when you do get it, it feels so good. It feels so good when like that weapon drops and it's best in slot, and you can go and enchant it and just be like, ha, I've got this piece, at least for the next couple weeks. I'm set, I'm good to go. So that's really cool. Yeah, I really enjoy that. There's Mythic Plus again, which is excellent. I had a lot of fun going into some of these dungeons. Some of them are quite difficult as well, and they interact with the new Great Vault, which is essentially your weekly mythic chest that gives you a piece of gear depending on the amount of mythics you've ran and the level of them. Now, the big difference here, and I actually haven't opened my weekly chest yet, but it would appear that both PvP, Raid, and Mythic Plus gear drop from the same Great Vault. And I think you can only choose one piece of gear. So you kind of get into an issue where, yes, you can have a lot of different options for you to choose from. So, and I guess I should explain this a little bit better. The big thing that happens here is you can go through content. And the more you do a specific type of content, say you run 1 Mythic dungeon, say you run 3 Mythic Plus dungeons, say you run 10 Mythic Plus dungeons. I'm not looking at the numbers right in front of me, but you get more items to choose from when you go to open your chest. So instead of 1 item, you get a choice between maybe a sword and a bracer or something like that, and you get to choose the one that your character needs more. Now, that also happens amongst PvP and raiding. So, for instance, say you did a whole bunch of PvP stuff on one character, a whole bunch of raiding on one character, and a whole bunch of Mythic Plus on one character. Well, you could in fact at the weekly chest have 9 different pieces of gear to choose from. And from what I understand and from what I've read, you only get to pick one of those 9 pieces of gear, which makes sense because you get a lot of choice for what that piece is. The difficulty, though, is that you probably shouldn't have a PvP character and a PvE character be the same character, because you're going to have to choose between the two of them. You also might feel like you're not getting the same amount of reward if you do, raids and dungeons on the same character, because you're going to have to choose between those 2 different rewards. Now, the good thing is that out of the 9 rewards, you're probably going to get a piece that you absolutely need. The bad thing is that you kind of have that, I would say, just redundancy, where like you've done so much content that you could have spread it amongst alts and had a better time. Which handily leads us into the next subject I want to talk about. Alts feel way better in Shadowlands, so much better. It starts with Threads of Fate and the ability to level differently on your alt character, and it ends with the fact that it's just so much easier to do certain objectives in game. For instance, my big desire was to have one primarily PvE character and one primarily PvP character. I just have to level them, and now they just have to do their weekly caps, and they're good to go. It took a little bit of effort to get them all ready to, to rumble at level 60, but once there, it feels so nice. I just log in, I do the stuff that I kind of want to achieve in a week. For instance, for my warrior, that's the PvE character, I'll do maybe some raid bosses, or maybe I'll do some Mythic Plus, just enough to have some choices in my Great Vault at the end of the week, and then I'll go on to my PvP character, I'll cap Conquest, and I will once again earn enough honor, or ranked honor, to get a PvP reward at the end of the week. And then there you have it, that's it. It's such a simple system, and I don't know why they had to change it each and every expansion, but at the moment it feels really good, and I'm having a lot of fun on both of my characters. So the last piece of the PvE puzzle is of course the raid. This launched just recently, and in fact this week we're going to have the raid finder and mythic come out for it as well. And it's been really cool. I think the raid bosses have felt very good. I've heard from a lot of people, and I'm not necessarily a top-end raider. The footage you'll see here is me just like sticking my toes into a heroic pug, which did not go great, but I've been hearing a lot of rumors that heroic is a lot harder this time around. I don't know if that's true or not, or if I just tell myself to feel better about myself when I go to sleep. But yeah, so the raid was really good. I haven't done all the bosses. I have experienced some of the bosses, and we even actually led a raid, which was really cool. So it was a lot of fun. I think the boss design is really good. The aesthetic of the raid is really cool, and in terms of lore and the actual villain, I think it works really well with the Revendreth area, and the kind of struggle that's going on in the Shadowlands. And I'm not going to get too into the story because I know some people still want to play through it, but yeah, that's kind of what's going on, and I really do enjoy the raids. There's some cleaning up they've done. Like I said, there's no war forging or anything like that, so when you get a piece of gear, it's a good piece of gear. There's no reroll tokens either, which some people are kind of upset about because it allowed you to really prioritize loot from one boss, which is nice, but I also don't mind not having to forget about reroll tokens, then go back to the city, then go back to the raid every single time. So that's kind of nice. The one thing I will say, and this ties into the legendary powers, the way you create a legendary is you need a legendary memory, which drops from something in the game. You need soul ash, you need a crafted piece of gear that you can buy off the auction house or craft it yourself, and then some sort of stat pieces that are once again just bought off the auction house or crafted yourself. But the legendary memories are the big drops, and these come from world bosses, these come from dungeons, these come from Torghast, and they come from raids, they come from rep grinds, they come from like all sources in World of Warcraft, but certain characters, certain specs best in slot legendaries are much harder to get than others. And in particular, I have one that's trapped behind sort of a later raid boss, and I'm like super anxious to get there, but I'm sad that I'm not going to get there, and then I'm fighting with all these people who have legendaries already, and I'm like, ugh. So it's kind of this tough situation. It's really nice because there is a reward that is super valuable that I'm hunting for, but it's kind of hard because I know certain people were able to get their legendaries that might be their best in slot ones in different ways. Now, obviously, I could also get a suboptimal legendary to get my best in slot legendary, but then you're wasting a bunch of currency. So it's a really difficult question, and I think ultimately these questions, I mentioned it for this, I mentioned it for the decision of, the Great Vault and what item you get to choose, as well as the Covenants. There's a lot more questions in World of Warcraft this expansion, and I think that's the sign of the fact that they have systems that actually make players think, and actually make players want different things, and actually make players engaged with the content. So I think it's the sign that things are going well. But at the time, it's difficult, and I think it's hard to kind of grasp that as a player. Alright, and now we're moving on to PvP. This is the last point I have. I literally just have a list of like a few broad topics I wanted to talk about, and I knew I would be able to just ramble and like rant about all of them because I'm pretty excited about a lot of these things, but I have a lot of like up and down thoughts depending on how things go each day. So I knew I'd be able to talk a mile a minute about each of these subjects, and I do not think this video has disappointed me so far. But let's talk about PvP. The big thing, conquest and honor is a currency again. And man, does it feel good. Like, the ability to do PvP, earn honor from quests, from weekly quests, get conquest, have a cap, and buy an item that you actually want from a vendor in the main city feels so good. And I have no idea how that wasn't a design that just stuck with the game. I don't know how we had to go through all these like horrible designs to get back to this design. I have no idea, but thank goodness we have gotten back to this design because it is so much better than all the other ones. Like, it feels so good, and it feels so nice to be able to just go and buy the piece of gear that I want to earn. So I think that's really good. The big thing here though is that like the actual combat in PvP also feels really good. I'm in arenas, I've been in some Battlegrounds, I've been in ranked arenas, which normally I don't stick my head into too much, and it's been a lot of fun. There are some specs that are doing a ton of damage, or at least that's what I tell myself when they one-shot me. But overall, you're gonna have that at the start of expansions. That's kind of part of the game, right? You're gonna have some classes that just do really well in very specific situations. And if it's a thief that one-shots you or does a lot of damage in PvP, that's not the craziest thing I've ever heard. But hopefully everything gets smoothed over as time goes on. People get their legendaries, people get their spec feeling how they're supposed to be. But overall, I think PvP's been very enjoyable, and more than anything, I've actually felt like I want to PvP because I can get rewards and I can choose what rewards I'm earning. But yeah, there you have it, my initial thoughts on Shadowlands. It went all over the place. It got a little bit ranty at places, but I think it really drove home the point that I'm having a lot of fun with the game. No, I'm not gonna stop playing any of my other MMOs. You know me, I like to bounce around everything. But I definitely think I'm having a lot more fun with Shadowlands than I did in BFA. And I feel, at least at this point, that it was worth purchasing the expansion and trying it out. I mean, the other thing, an expansion is just such an exciting time in an MMO. It just is. You're kind of like riding the hype throughout the leveling process, throughout the initial runs of the dungeons, throughout the initial runs of the raid. It's such an exciting time to be at the start of an expansion, and it still is. So if you haven't tried WoW, if you haven't jumped into the expansion and you're considering it, I would give it a try. The other big thing to remember is that their free trial goes to level 20 still, but the max level is now level 60 versus 120, or 130 I guess it might have been if they didn't squish. Anyways, the free trial gives you a lot better experience of the game. Obviously it doesn't give you the full endgame experience, but it does give you a better representation of what the game has to offer. So I would check that out if you are at all interested. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.